Rank 10. Moonstone, the light that waited in the tomb. Buried deep in the central Anatolian plateau, beneath layers of fractured basalt and sun-hardened clay, archaeologists uncovered what appeared to be an unremarkable Bronze Age grave. No gold, no carved weaponry, no royal insignia, but the orientation of the tomb, precisely aligned with lunar rise during the spring equinox, suggested that this individual was not ordinary. At the center of the grave, placed directly above the rib cage, lay a perfectly spherical stone, just under 3 centimeters across, pale, translucent, and impossibly smooth. Mineralogical analysis identified it as moonstone, an orthoclase-rich feldspar sourced from a nearby volcanic range. But what drew immediate attention was its condition. Despite being buried for more than 3,000 years in a sealed chamber, the stone still emitted visible adolescence, a soft, bluish glow when viewed under low indirect light. This phenomenon, common in freshly mined moonstone, is caused by the scattering of light between microscopic feldspar layers. Over centuries, that effect should degrade, and yet this specimen remained luminous. There were no artificial coatings, no trace of resin or heat treatment, no tool marks either. The sphere had not been cut or shaped by any known Bronze Age method. It had been placed, perfect, silent, waiting. Alongside the burial, archaeologists discovered fragmented ceramic tablets etched with early lunar symbols, including a crescent flanked by dual spirals, motifs linked to Neolithic fertility cults and seasonal rebirth rituals. In this culture, the moon was not merely a celestial object, but a vessel of transition between life and what followed. The placement of the moonstone, its orientation, and its glow all pointed to one belief: that the monarch entombed here had taken a fragment of the sky with him, perhaps not for power, but for direction. Since its excavation, the stone has remained in controlled storage at the Museum of Anatolian Civilizations. It's not catalogued for public viewing, and no replications have been permitted. Under archival lighting, researchers have confirmed the glow persists, dim, steady, and unexplained. Rank 9. Amethyst, the crown that never fades. In the Lambayeque Valley of northern Peru, under a layer of adobe soil rich with copper oxide and bone fragments, a tomb was opened that would rewrite the limits of South American metallurgy, ritual, and power. The site belonged to the so-called Lord of Sipan, a Moche ruler entombed around the 3rd century CE with astonishing precision and wealth. Surrounding him were warriors, consorts, llamas, and offerings of gold, turquoise, and lapis lazuli. But at the center of his funeral mask, buried beneath the surface for more than 1,700 years, was a stone that had no business being there. It wasn't turquoise from Chile. It wasn't imported jade from Mesoamerica. It was amethyst, not pale purple, as most ancient samples tend to fade over time. This one was deep, saturated violet, bordering on black in its depth, a color rarely preserved and seldom seen outside of modern heat-treated stones. Yet this piece was untouched. No signs of burning, no inclusions consistent with artificial enhancement. And most curious of all, the crystal structure matched no known deposit currently active in the Andes. Geologists traced its possible origin to a depleted vein near present-day Huancavelica, a mine so deep in the mountain that modern retrieval is nearly impossible without the use of industrial drilling. There's no record of the Moche having reached it, but the stone was revered. Unlike other gemstones in the tomb, which were set in gold or wrapped in copper, this amethyst had been set in an alloy of electrum, a naturally occurring blend of gold and silver, reserved exclusively for divine or royal use. Rituals surrounding amethyst in early Andean cultures are poorly documented. However, a handful of pre-Inca codices describe violet stones as having purifying effects on both the physical and spiritual aspects of blood and vision, both literal and prophetic. In the Moche world, where power and spirituality were inextricably linked, this stone may have served a purpose beyond mere decoration. It may have been a declaration that the ruler buried here did not merely govern men, but interpreted signs beyond them. Since its recovery, the mask has remained under museum care in Lambayeque, shielded from light exposure except during controlled analysis. Decades after excavation, the stone's luster remains undiminished. No equivalent specimen has been authenticated in modern collections. Rank 8. Clear quartz. The blade buried to silence a curse. South of modern-day Luxor, where temple ruins fade into dust-blown hills, an unmarked shaft was discovered beneath a collapsed field wall. The burial site was modest by Egyptian standards. No gilded coffins, no protective shabtis, no ceremonial boat. But what lay inside was anything but ordinary. The central figure, a male estimated to be in his late 40s, had been wrapped not in linen, but in raw hemp, darkened by resins and pitch. Where a crook or scepter might have rested in other burials, this man held a blade, 7 inches in length. No hilt, no metal. Carved entirely from transparent quartz. The stone was local, likely mined from the quartz-rich veins of the eastern desert, but the execution raised questions. It bore no edge suitable for combat. The taper was delicate, nearly fragile, and under magnification, the surface revealed no signs of flaking or percussion. Instead, it had been shaped by relentless abrasion. Layer by layer, polished for function, but not for use. What was more disturbing than its construction was its placement. The blade had been aligned precisely over the trachea of the deceased, pressed flat against his neck with resin seals anchoring both ends to the body. No other object in the tomb had been sealed in this way. It wasn't an amulet, it was a seal, a suppression. Carved into the mud brick wall above the head was a line of demotic script, quick, uneven, almost carved in haste. The glyphs were translated into a phrase both ominous and straightforward. May the breath be silenced. May the name not follow. This ran counter to everything Egyptian death culture stood for. Names were meant to endure. Breath was meant to return. Here they were being locked away. The blade itself is now classified as a restricted archival record. It's registered in a sealed section of the Egyptian Museum's artifact vault, cataloged without public display rights. In the decades since excavation, it has undergone no further study, by directive, not by oversight. Whether that decision came from conservators or from older traditions that linger just beneath official reasoning has not been clarified. Rank 7, Labradorite, the veil between worlds. The site had no name. Satellite scans from a Norwegian geotechnical survey in 2016 revealed minor subsidence along a wind-scoured plateau in Nordland County, evidence of a long-collapsed structure beneath the permafrost. Drilling revealed carbonized timber sealed in compacted moraine. What emerged after weeks of excavation was a partially intact clinker-built vessel. Not a shipwreck, but a land burial of a longboat. The central chamber held a male estimated at over 60 years of age, with osteoarthritic wear in both femurs and a fused wrist, injuries consistent with prolonged horseback travel. A rusted bit and stirrup fragments suggested continental contact. The objects buried with him included a Persian iron blade, a Baltic amber rosary, and a flat rectangular labradorite measuring 11 by 7 centimeters. The labradorite showed no evidence of fasting or mounting. Instead, it appeared to have been used as a tool or tablet. Microscopic wear marks were consistent with prolonged skin contact along 2 edges. Petrographic thin sectioning confirmed its origin in the Kola Peninsula, a region associated with Sami quarrying zones known to have been active between the 9th and 11th centuries. In Sami ritual documentation, rare but preserved in ecclesiastical censuses from 1609, stones of labradorite composition were occasionally recorded under the term skyskins, objects used by Noaidi ritual practitioners during sleep-fasting rites to record visions, not interpret them. They were not valued for color, but for surface irregularities believed to map liminal boundaries. The stone from Nordland displays 2 deep lamellar fractures and an internal zoning feature consistent with early-stage tectonic alteration. Rather than extracting the object, researchers scanned and reburied it by the Cultural Heritage Protocol of the Sami Parliament. The location is now classified with no public index entry in Norway's National Heritage Database. As of 2024, no Labradorite artifact of comparable dimensions or provenance has been legally excavated in Northern Europe. Rank 6, Danburite, the gem that carried what words couldn't. They didn't find it in a temple, not in a tomb either. The body was seated, cross-legged, spine upright, hands resting on the knees, at the back of a stone chamber carved into the cliffside above a glacier-fed valley in northern Bhutan. No inscriptions marked the entrance. No relics flanked the alcove, just a single offering, a Danburite crystal resting directly over the chest. Roughly 8 centimeters long and faintly pink in color, the crystal had been drilled end to end, its core hollowed with remarkable precision. Inside, remnants of an ochre-colored powder were sealed between 2 waxed plugs, bound in a type of vegetal resin not native to the region. No other artifacts in the chamber were preserved, but the climate, cold, dry, and untouched by modern air, left the gem and its contents remarkably intact. Danburite is a calcium-boron silicate mineral. Its structure, tetragonal and stable, allows for unusually clean internal channels. Found primarily in metamorphic limestone environments, it is relatively rare in the Himalayan belt. The chemical fingerprint of this specimen pointed not to Bhutan, but to a quarry system west of modern-day Tajikistan. That's over 1,000 kilometers away, across terrain impassable for most of the year. Why was it here? And why is this place this way? Anthropologists reviewing oral histories from the region referenced a funerary tradition among highland communities in which final breaths were believed to contain the last unspoken truth of the dying. In some instances, those of kings, ascetics, or visionaries, that breath was sealed in a vessel to be offered upward during eclipse rites. The Danburite crystal may have served as such a vessel, a container not of ashes, but of unresolved meaning. The artifact is currently held at a high-altitude archive operated jointly by Bhutan's Department of Culture and the National Museum in Paro. It is not listed in any public catalog. Requests for sampling the internal material have been denied under a cultural protection order filed in 2019. As far as the record shows, no one has opened the crystal since its discovery, and no one knows what the powder inside was meant to say. Rank 5, Angelite, the voice you hear when you're finally ready to listen. Divers weren't looking for a tomb. The site was marked on colonial-era maps as a submerged village, one of dozens lost to rising waters after a limestone dam was constructed along Mexico's Rio Usumacinta in the mid-20th century. The foundations that emerged beneath layers of algae and calcite buildup match that description. Stone walls, traces of stucco. Masonry is consistent with the late Maya architectural style. But near the center of the complex, sealed behind what appeared to be a collapsed altar platform, they found a burial unlike any other in the region. A figure preserved in partial mineralization lay supine in a shallow chamber carved from bedrock. No jade, no obsidian, no shell. Just one object, a sphere 5 centimeters in diameter, resting in the palm of the right hand. The mineral was quickly identified as anhydrite, a calcium sulfate that, when exposed to air, begins absorbing moisture and transforms into gypsum. But this specimen had not degraded. Microanalysis confirmed that it had been partially stabilized through a crystallization process that was not yet fully understood. Its surface was smooth, flawless, and lacked tool marks. A pale blue hue shimmered beneath a translucent outer layer. The divers, noting how strangely it interacted with sonar, called it La Piedra Muda, the mute stone. Anhydrite of this composition is found in parts of Oaxaca and eastern Honduras. It is rarely shaped, and when it is, its form seldom survives humidity. Oral traditions in Highland Chiapas mention stones of quiet used in the preparation of oracles. Objects presented to the mouth during trance rituals, not to speak through, but to still the inner voice before listening. Whether this sphere serves such a purpose is unverified, but its isolation within a waterlogged crypt and its placement in the hand, not at the head, chest, or feet, suggested volition rather than accident. After recovery, the artifact was placed in a sealed chamber to prevent hydration. It has not been moved since. Researchers report no unusual acoustic behavior, but a request to conduct resonance tests was postponed indefinitely. Not for lack of equipment. The application was withdrawn without explanation by the principal investigator, and on the official intake form, under cultural notes, one sentence appears without a source. It only speaks to the one who stops asking. Rank 4. Moldavite. The impact that was never forgotten. A burial mound near the Vltava River was first catalogued in the 1930s, but dense root systems and shallow groundwater made excavation nearly impossible. Only in 2011, after a flood-induced landslide destabilized the embankment, did ground-penetrating radar finally capture the whole structure. A collapsed timber chamber from the Bell Beaker period, dated to around 2300 BCE. Inside, the wooden coffin had decayed to fiber. The skeleton, male, approximately 40 years old, was compressed but largely articulated. Carbon isotope ratios suggested a diet rich in freshwater fish and game from the forest. Surrounding him was a series of objects out of place for the region. Baltic amber beads, antler tools, a copper dagger of Iberian casting technique, and at the base of the spine, a rough bottle green tektite. The object was immediately recognizable to geologists as Moldavite, a natural silica glass formed by a meteorite impact in the southern Bohemian Basin roughly 15 million years ago. Most known specimens are small, pitted, and irregular in shape. This one was large, nearly 40 grams, and uncut, but naturally lenticular, with an elongated ripple texture. Its placement was unusual. Unlike ceremonial stones typically found near the head or chest, this one was placed beneath the sacrum, suggesting a deliberate association with posture or rebirth. While Moldavite has no known spiritual significance in prehistoric Central Europe, the rarity of its occurrence and distinct surface features indicate it was likely recognized as a struck stone, an object shaped by forces beyond human craft. Petrographic comparison matched its composition to the Besedness Field, a site nearly 200 kilometers away, whose known outcrops were not accessible until much later. Whether the artifact arrived through trade, migration, or pilgrimage is unknown. No inscriptions accompanied the stone. No cultural narrative survived that could clarify its use. But its position, beneath the spine, unwrapped and unworked, suggests it was never meant to be worn or seen. It was meant to stay still. The artifact now resides in the Czech National Museum's Geological Archive, indexed as a geological sample, not a funerary item. The tomb itself has since been reburied under soil stabilization orders to prevent further erosion. There are no plans for a public exhibit. Rank 3, Selenite, the light that was too pure to hide. In 1998, a cluster of subterranean ossuaries was documented near the edge of the Dakhla Oasis in Egypt's western desert, an area known more for Roman-era inscriptions than deep pre-dynastic burial activity. One shaft in particular, narrow, spiral cut, descending nearly 12 meters, led to a sealed chamber unlike the others. There were no painted walls, no cartouches, just a limestone sarcophagus encased in a crystalline crust. When researchers opened the lid, they found no body, only salt residue, partial cloth fragments, and a collection of disintegrated organ vessels. What remained intact was a thin rod of gypsum var, selenite, lying parallel to where the spine would have been. The object measured just over 22 centimeters in length and was unbroken. It lacked carvings or decorative motifs. Its cleaved edges, examined under SEM imaging, showed no signs of tool shaping, but displayed natural twin-plane development, indicating it had been split directly from a larger crystal without modification. Despite the extreme aridity of the chamber, the crystal retained near-optical transparency, highly unusual for selenite stored in desert conditions for over 3 millennia. Isotopic trace data indicate that the origin zones are located near the present-day Nakab Plateau, over 300 kilometers away. No quarrying records survive from the relevant period. Still, sediment buildup within the burial shaft suggests that the crystal was lowered independently from the sarcophagus, implying it was not part of the embalming toolkit, but a distinct ritual object. In Egyptian mineral catalogs from the Middle Kingdom onward, selenite was never recorded as a commodity. Still, Coptic burial literature from centuries later references stones of silence used not in mummification, but in body absence rites, symbolic burials for those lost or unrecoverable. This site showed no trauma, no remnants of violent collapse. The sarcophagus had been intentionally sealed around a space. The rod of selenite was removed for preservation and then returned to its exact placement and orientation in 2004, following a ruling by the Supreme Council of Antiquities that the object held non-commercial spiritual significance, which was inconsistent with museum display policies. Since then, the shaft has been resealed with stone and marked with a conservation-only tag. Rank 2, Celestite, the voice that waits in silence. Restoration work at a collapsed Orthodox chapel in northern Albania unearthed more than masonry. Beneath a foundation stone, workers uncovered a narrow shaft sealed with hand-pressed clay. The shaft led to a previously unmapped and undocumented limestone cavity, and inside it, a single carved reliquary box. It was not Byzantine in design. Carbon dated to the 10th century, the box predated the chapel by at least 400 years. No remains were found, only layers of fine linen and a small celestite crystal, hexagonal, light blue, and slightly fractured along two axes. The box, oddly, had no hinges or closure mechanisms. It had been sealed with organic resin, now crystallized. Nearby, scratched faintly into the chamber wall, were three characters from an extinct variant of Old Church Slavonic, transcribed as mluchenia, a word meaning silence, but more accurately, the state before voice. Celestite, strontium sulfate, is relatively soft and sensitive to pressure. In the Balkans, natural deposits occur in limited quantities near Shkodër and Lezhë, but this specimen did not match their isotopic signature. Instead, analysis suggests a geological profile consistent with deposits near Lake Chad, over 3,000 kilometers to the south. There are no clear records of celestite being used as a liturgical material in the early Orthodox world. However, a few monastic texts from Mount Athos describe translucent sky crystals used not in worship, but in acts of enclosure. Rites performed for monks who chose complete silence until death. Such monks were sometimes buried without funerary liturgy, their names struck from the registry, their devotion considered complete through erasure. This celestite bore no engravings. It was not mounted or embedded in iconography. It rested within linen folds, not hidden, but protected from touch. There were no other artifacts, no altar, no inscription offering context beyond the one word. Following standard conservation procedures, the crystal was logged, photographed, and returned to the reliquary. Local authorities declined requests to move the object to a museum, citing its religious provenance. The chamber has since been resealed at the request of the Orthodox Diocese of Shkodër. In first place, Seraphinite, the wings that never touch the ground. Among the Evenki elders of southeastern Siberia, there survives a tale told only during the onset of winter, a season when migration halts and memory sharpens. The story tells of a woman who walked alone into the snow, carrying no fire, speaking no name, and asking for no guidance. When asked why she departed, the tale offers no answer, only that the winds bent around her path and that she left behind no trace but stone. Until 2011, no material record matched the story. That changed when land remediation along the Yenisei River uncovered an unmarked grave at the edge of an eroded cedar forest. No ceramics, no tools, a shallow cut into glacial silt lined with river stone. Inside, the skeletal remains of a female in her mid-30s were placed supine with her arms straight, palms down. Carbon-14 dating of the site indicates a date between 580 and 620 CE. No jewelry was found, no textile fragments beyond phosphatized residue, but beneath the left scapula, sheltered from moisture by geological compression, lay a plate of clinochlore, now known as Seraphinite. The feathered chatoyancy patterns were intact, undisturbed by soil acidity. The stone had not been mounted or etched. Its edges showed pressure flaking, no polishing, no trade finishing. Seraphinite is not known to have been used in the funerary customs of this era. It does not appear in Altaic grave inventories or early Tungusic lithic caches. Yet geological analysis traced its origin directly to the Korshunovskoye field, nearly 300 kilometers east. No known overland exchange route existed between the two regions during the 7th century. Why the stone was placed there, beneath the wing bone, not above it, remains undocumented. But no animal remains were included. No heart, no signs of communal burial. Only one individual, one layer, one piece of chlorite. The site has since been left undisturbed under Evenki cultural protection. No museum claim has been filed, no further excavation permitted.